I had always believed that hitchhiking was an adventure. Traveling the open roads with nothing but my backpack, I thought I would meet interesting people and see parts of the country I'd never seen before. But one night, I realized how wrong I was. It was a dark, moonless night. I had been walking along a lonely highway for hours with no sign of civilization in sight. The air was cold, and a thick fog was beginning to roll in, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead of me. My legs ached, and my throat was dry. I was exhausted. Finally, I heard it, the low hum of an approaching car. I turned around and saw the faint glow of headlights cutting through the mist. I stuck out my thumb, hoping and praying that the driver would stop. The car, an old, beat-up sedan, slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see who was inside. I hesitated for a moment, but the thought of walking for miles in the dark was unbearable. I opened the door and slid into the passenger seat. "Thanks for picking me up," I said, trying to sound cheerful. The driver didn't respond. He was a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a weathered face. His eyes were hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses, even though it was the middle of the night. He kept his gaze fixed on the road ahead, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The silence in the car was unsettling. I glanced at the dashboard. The radio was off, and there was no music playing. The only sound was the rumble of the engine and the occasional creak of the car's old frame. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to break the awkward silence. The man didn't answer right away. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice low and raspy. "Just driving?" His answer sent a chill down my spine. Something about his tone was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, glancing out the window at the passing trees. The fog outside seemed to be getting thicker, swallowing up the world around us. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The road ahead stretched on endlessly, with no signs of life anywhere. My unease grew with each passing mile, and I found myself gripping the edge of my seat. I decided to try again. "So, what brings you out here this late?" The man didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was even lower, almost a whisper. "I'm looking for something." I swallowed hard. What are you looking for?" He turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see the corner of his mouth twist into a smile. "You'll find out soon enough." Panic surged through me. I stared at the door handle, considering the possibility of jumping out of the moving car. But before I could make a decision, the man suddenly veered off the highway and onto a narrow dirt road that led into the woods. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man didn't answer. He just kept driving deeper into the woods, the trees closing in around us like a wall. The car bounced and rattled on the rough road, the headlights barely piercing the thick fog. I had to get out. I couldn't stay in that car any longer. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the door handle, trying to move as quietly as possible. But just as my fingers brushed the cold metal, the man slammed on the brakes. I was thrown forward, my seatbelt catching me just in time. The car came to a sudden stop in the middle of the woods, surrounded by towering trees and thick fog. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stared at the driver, waiting for him to make his move. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, slowly, the man turned to face me. His sunglasses had slipped down his nose, revealing cold, empty eyes. There was no light in them, no emotion, just darkness. Why don't you stay a while?" he whispered, his voice sending chills down my spine. Before I could react, he reached across the seat and grabbed my arm with a grip like iron. I screamed and struggled, but his hold was too strong. Panic surged through me as I fought to free myself, my heart pounding in my chest. In the struggle, I managed to kick open the door. I tumbled out of the car and hit the ground hard, scrambling to my feet as fast as I could. Without looking back, I ran into the woods, branches slashing at my face and arms as I fled. The fog was thick, making it nearly impossible to see where I was going. My lungs burned, and my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. I could hear footsteps behind me, heavy and deliberate, getting closer with each passing second. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, praying that I could find my way out of the woods and back to the highway. But the trees seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning, trapping me in their endless maze. Finally, I saw it, a faint light up ahead. Hope surged through me as I pushed myself to run faster towards the light. I burst out of the trees and stumbled onto another road, this one narrow and winding. I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for air. The footsteps behind me had stopped. I was alone again, or so I hoped. After what felt like an eternity, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. I scrambled to my feet, waving my arms frantically to flag down the approaching car. It slowed down and came to a stop beside me. The driver, a woman in her 30s, rolled down the window and looked at me with concern. "Are you okay?" "What happened?" I couldn't speak. I could only nod as tears streamed down my face. She unlocked the door, and I climbed into the passenger seat, still trembling. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man standing at the edge of the woods, watching me. But there was nothing there, just the dark, empty road behind us. I never hitchhiked again after that night. The open road had lost its appeal, replaced by a deep, lingering fear. Every time I see a car driving down a lonely highway, I can't help but wonder who or what might be behind the wheel, and I pray that I never find out. It was the dead of night, and I was stuck in the middle of nowhere. My car had overheated hours ago, and after waiting for someone to pass by, I decided to start walking. The highway stretched on for miles, nothing but a thin ribbon of asphalt cutting through a flat, empty desert. Not a single building or light in sight, just miles of sand and distant mountains. I checked my phone again. No signal, no GPS, just a black screen with the time glaring back at me. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen a car pass by. The temperature had dropped sharply since the sun had set, and a cold wind whipped across the road, sending chills down my spine. It felt like the world had forgotten about this road, and me along with it. After what felt like forever, headlights appeared in the distance, slowly growing brighter as a car approached. I waved my arms desperately, praying the driver would stop. The car slowed and came to a halt beside me. It was an old station wagon, the kind you'd expect to see in some faded photograph from decades ago. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't see the driver's face. The passenger window rolled down and I leaned in. Inside was a man who looked to be in his late 40s, with thinning hair and tired eyes. He wore a button-up shirt with the collar frayed at the edges. "Need a lift?" he asked, his voice soft, almost too quiet for the empty highway. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound less desperate than I felt. "My car broke down a few miles back." The man nodded. "Hop in. I'm headed east toward the next town." I hesitated for a second. Something about the situation felt off. But the cold and the growing sense of isolation made the decision for me. I opened the door and slid into the passenger seat. The warmth inside the car was a welcome relief from the biting cold outside. The man didn't say anything as he pulled back onto the highway, the car rumbling quietly as it picked up speed. I buckled my seatbelt and stared ahead, trying to shake off the unease that lingered in the back of my mind. "Thanks for stopping," I said after a few minutes of silence. "I didn't think anyone would come by." The man glanced at me briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "Not many people drive this road at night." "Why's that?" I asked, trying to make conversation. The man didn't answer right away. He just kept his eyes on the road, his fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Some roads aren't meant to be traveled after dark," he said quietly. I frowned. "What do you mean?" He glanced at me again, his tired eyes darker than before. "There are places out here. Places that don't follow the rules of the world. This highway, for example. It's not like other roads. At night, it becomes something else." My unease grew stronger. I shifted in my seat, trying to ignore the creeping feeling that something was very wrong. "What do you mean by that?" I asked cautiously. The man sighed, his grip tightening on the wheel. "This road, it's different. Sometimes it takes people places they don't expect. Places they're not supposed to go." A shiver ran down my spine. I tried to laugh it off. "You're telling me this road is haunted?" The man didn't laugh. He just kept driving, the car's headlights cutting through the darkness. The road stretched out ahead of us, long and straight, with no end in sight. The empty desert on either side seemed to go on forever, untouched by time. I stared out the window, watching the landscape blur past. It all looked the same, no landmarks, no signs, just an endless stretch of road. After a while, I began to notice something strange. The scenery outside wasn't changing. We had been driving for at least 30 minutes, but everything looked the same as it had when we started. The same rocks, the same shrubs, the same distant mountains. It was as if we hadn't moved at all. I glanced at the man, who seemed oblivious to the strange loop we were in. His expression remained calm, focused, like he was just going through the motions of driving. "Are we getting close to the next town?" I asked, trying to hide the rising panic in my voice. The man didn't respond right away. He kept driving, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Finally, he spoke, his voice even quieter than before. "We're almost there." His words didn't reassure me. The feeling of wrongness in the air had only grown stronger. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like we were heading somewhere we weren't supposed to go. Like the road was taking us to a place that shouldn't exist. I decided I couldn't sit there in silence any longer. I needed answers. "What's really going on here?" I asked, my voice shaking. The man glanced at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes, fear. "This road," he said slowly, "it doesn't always lead to where you think it does. It's easy to get lost out here. And once you're lost, you might not find your way back." My heart pounded in my chest. "What do you mean? Lost where?" He didn't answer. Instead, he slowed the car and pulled over to the side of the road. The engine idled as we sat there in the dark, the only sound the low hum of the car and the distant wind outside. "You should get out here," he said quietly. I stared at him in disbelief. "What? Why?" "It's not safe to keep driving. Not on this road. Get out here and walk back the way we came. It's the only way you'll get out." Panic surged through me. "What are you talking about? I can't just get out in the middle of nowhere." The man looked at me, his eyes filled with something that chilled me to the bone. "This road isn't what it seems. If you stay on it, you'll never leave. Please just get out." I looked around, my mind racing. The empty highway stretched out on either side with no sign of life. I didn't want to get out. I didn't want to be alone again. But something in the man's voice told me he wasn't lying. There was something wrong with this road, something I couldn't see but could feel deep in my bones. Reluctantly, I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached for the door handle. The man nodded, as if he knew I had made the right choice. "Good luck," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I opened the door and stepped out onto the cold asphalt. As soon as I was out, the car sped off into the night, disappearing down the road. I watched the taillights fade into the distance, leaving me alone once again. The silence was deafening. The empty highway stretched on, endless and unchanging. I started walking, heading back the way I had come, hoping to find my way out of whatever strange nightmare I had stumbled into. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The darkness seemed to press in around me, and every step felt like it was taking me further from reality. The wind whispered through the desert, carrying faint, ghostly voices that sent shivers down my spine. I glanced back, half expecting to see the man's car returning, but the road behind me was empty, just as empty as the road ahead. And then, in the distance, I saw headlights. Another car, approaching slowly. My heart pounded in my chest. Was this another chance to escape, or was it something else, something worse? As the car drew closer, I realized I had a choice. I could flag it down, hope that this driver was different, that they could take me away from this cursed road. Or I could keep walking, keep heading back the way I came, hoping that I could find my way out on foot. The car slowed as it approached, and I stood there, frozen, torn between hope and fear. The window rolled down, and inside was a man with tired eyes and thinning hair, wearing a frayed button-up shirt. He looked at me and asked, "Need a lift?" I stared at him, my heart racing, and realized with a sinking feeling that I had been here before. This was the same man, the same car, the same road, and I was trapped.